Hello, my name is Kanova. Are you ready?
It's time for the mid-year transfer. Let's first start by looking at the beginning of 2021. This is the opening page or the name page of my journal. I did a year at a glance, my grid spacing guide, which is very handy, a key. I did a very dedicated title page. I still love this page. I also did the year in pictures, and I put my index at the back. So what we're going to find is these particular pages have a lot of changes in the second half of 2021 because it's really about trying to figure out what works and what didn't work. And this is really a time of great reflection because you're trying to make sure that whatever goals you set earlier in the year, whatever ways you were tracking those goals or tracking your days, the things that were useful, you are really sort of fine-tuning them at this point in the year. All right, so I decided that my opening page looked a little lonely for a journal that was chock full of lots of detail and color. So I made the decision to decorate these pages. Every page I gave a great deal of thought and was trying to make sure that it met my personal aesthetic, but also was doing what I needed it to in terms of tracking my days. So making sure the bullet journal was suiting its purpose. So last month I ventured deeper into stamps and really enjoyed the process, and I decided to do that again. I ordered some stamps and some inks, some new inks to create this process because it was kind of new to me using stamps on a daily basis, because for the most part one of my purposes of using the journal is to draw, to get better at drawing. So I ordered a bunch of these gorgeous fan stamps, and we'll get into where those came from at the end. I'm going to talk specifically about the products used while I'm making this journal. And I decided to experiment with making different patterns and colors and really making this journal look like what a journal would look like maybe if you purchased it and it had some sort of beginning or end decoration. I am using this stamp in a myriad of ways. If you purchase the stamp, you'll see a bunch of different variations for using it, and I kind of riff on some of those ideas, and then in other ways I create my own based on my own personal needs. The cool thing about a stamp with a shape like this is that you can sort of fit them into one another. You can put them in closer, you can space them out. I would recommend, though, doing some planning before you start the stamping process, thinking about how you want to do it because it can get a little bit complicated. You'll see me sort of moving the journal because the flatter and more steady the surface, the better these stamps will come out. It'll be much clearer. You can't really see too much on the screen, but that first green stamp wasn't as clear as I would have liked it. I'm also using a sheet of paper on the side that is being used to sort of clear the stamp of ink. So I'm stamping it once for a beautiful stamp, and in some ways I'm wasting that ink by putting it on the paper. I'm also using the paper as a sort of block so I don't put stamp on a page where I don't want it, even though in this case this particular creation is going to go on both sides. All right, so this is going to take a minute, so I am going to speed up this process for purposes of this video. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process of figuring out what works and doesn't work. If you are new to bullet journaling, then you will probably have never transferred a journal. There's a lot of videos out there talking about the transferring of one journal to another, and if you are aesthetic bullet journaling, typically what happens is there aren't enough pages in one journal to fit a year. I use the Maisie Lane Co dot grid journal. It's made of vegan leather, and it has 160 GSM semi-coated white paper, and there are 192 pages. I purchased both journals for the year at one time. I did this because I really wanted the journals to kind of be bookends of one another. The colors are not the same, but the journal is the same, and I think the colors sort of complement each other. They are both personalized with my name, which I absolutely adore. I cannot have any complaints about this journal. It has been great. I know that there are many great bullet journals out there, but this is just the one that I have chose to use this year. I watched a number of videos where people went through the process of choosing journals, and I thought this was the best one for me because of the coated pages. I both draw, stamp, paint in my journal, and I needed it to hold up as much as possible. I am going in right now just to get back to the details of what I'm doing, and I'm using UniBall Sigmo metallic pens. I have them in a number of colors. You can see some of them on the screen sitting there, and I have more of them actually in my case. I love these pens. They have great color, and I don't know if the video is going to pick up the beauty and the detail that it's adding, but there are little dots on the stamp, and I am using this pen, both the silver and the gold, to go in and add dots in there. It's just a slight little detail, but it's amazing how something so small can just sort of elevate something to something more, something that's beautiful to something more. At least I think so. This takes some time, but in terms of ability, this is something that's fairly easy to do. Even the stamping, I think, is feasible for somebody at any level. It's just a matter of sitting down and sort of figuring out your patterns first. I use a number of different patterns in this process. Now, you're probably thinking, Kanova, you just covered up the area of the notebook where you had, this journal is loved by, that's what it says at the beginning of Maisie Lane's journals, and you put your name in there, and then it has the Maisie Lane logo. I chose this time to cover it up and really personalize this page. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to create cards with the specific information needed a little bit later, but I'm just going through the process of stamping the journal into the notebook, as you can see here. I have switched up the stamp and the colors. I am still going to be creating sort of intricate patterns with the stamp. This one is a little bit simpler, if you will. I am going to sort of go in with one color and stamp a pattern, and this is going to be my key page. A lot of people don't use the key anymore because they still sort of know their keys. They feel like they don't need to refer back to it, but I don't know why, I just kind of like to have the key there and handy. I also just sort of feel like, even though it's my personal bullet journal, it helps to allow others who may be taking a look at my agenda to sort of follow along. And also, you can just see what key I'm using. I think everybody has sort of set up their own version of this key. I'll be honest with you, I have not changed it from the beginning. When I started bullet journaling, when I sort of went through a bunch of videos and decided what key to use, and I don't even remember what key I decided, like who it came from, but I have not changed it, and I've memorized those items and continue to use them. And once you do, you really do just keep and stick with it. It's sort of tried and true. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But I keep the key here for a number of reasons. I just think it's good. It's a good reminder. Sometimes there are things in my journal that I don't use very often. So having the key there to sort of remind me if I need to is important. Completed, migrated, in process, those are things that I use all the time. And you have to decide for yourself whether that's something you feel like you need in your bullet journal or something you don't need. All right, so you can see how this pattern is coming together. You can see how I'm using the paper again to create my pattern but not transfer it, especially in this case because on the opposite side of this page, we're going to start our year at a glance. So we're going to go in and we're going to create our year at a glance there. But first we're going to finish up stamping this page. I can't really say enough about how beautifully these stamps stamp. You can purchase a lot of different ones. These were pricier than other stamps I have purchased, but what I will say is that the quality of the stamping of these stamps is far and above some of the others I have purchased. And I didn't have a lot of complaints about the others, but having used these stamps, I think they're well worth the money. All right, so the year at a glance, or the calendar year, is a full year look. It's that typical one sheet, if you will, of the calendar. And you might be thinking, do you really need that in this new journal? But I actually look back at dates all the time. You have to determine if that's something that you actually do. And if you do, you might want to do a year at a glance calendar again. This is one of the more tedious spreads to do. Some people do them with stickers. I probably should because my handwriting is not the best. My penmanship is not the best, and I probably would be better off using stickers, but I typically just go in and stamp them. So you could see me sort of going through the process of trying to decide what I was going to do with the page. I typically have a visual image of what I want, and then when I look at the page, I might decide that there's something else that's needed. In this case, I decided that this page needed a little bit of sparkle, so I'm using my UniBall Tsukineko metallic pens. I'm going to use the blue and the pink color, if you will, to add a little sparkle to this particular spread. So back to the year at a glance. I go back a lot and look at different dates for a number of reasons. I might need to have a full picture of the year in terms of planning for the future. So I think that having this calendar ready and available to me, despite the tediousness, is of importance. I don't, however, think that it's necessary for me to talk you through the process of creating this particular spread. The grid spacing guide, which you saw in the beginning, was of great help in creating these spreads. I highly recommend it. I am putting it back into my journal, but you'll see that where I place it is somewhere different than before. Again, this is a very tedious process. There are a number of sites that have either sort of stamps or stickers for this process. I actually highly recommend stickers for something like this, only because it won't smear. Like when you're trying to line things up, it's much easier to do with stickers than with various stamps. I'm using different colors to annotate the weeks versus the days of the week. This was one of those spreads I feel like no matter what I do to it, it never quite fits aesthetically. All right, so let's talk cards. So I am using the Archer and Olive notebook that came in the subscription box for June. I loved this notebook. If you watched my reveal video, you know that I kind of squealed when this notebook opened. Green is one of my favorite colors. I tested out the paper and made some decisions in terms of what would work on it, and I waited for the box in order to figure out what was the best use of spreads. So if you're wondering what's going on here, I had some extra pages at the back of my current journal, and this is what I use those pages for. Nothing ever really goes to waste. Even in the cutting of the green paper, I use the page that I had sort of tested every sort of marker and pencil on to use as my key page. There was just no need to not use it. So I am cutting up some gold paper. I cut up some gold paper to back it, just to give it a little razzle dazzle, if you will. And I created a few little lines so I could easily line it up. So I'm using that gold foily paper. It's really beautifully textured. And I'm using score tape. This is really great if you're doing pop-ups. It's double-sided and you can get it in various sizes. I am using, I believe it's the 1/4 of an inch size, but it comes in different sizes, and I have 3 different sizes. I find it very useful. See my little doodles for that I used in preparing and looking at the box. I love this tape in places like the key. It goes on very sort of flat, and it doesn't, you don't have to wait for it to dry. So when you're in a hurry, score tape is awesome. I'm testing out some pens to figure out what I'm going to use in terms of the key. Again, lots of planning beforehand, but then there's some things that happen in the process that I just do spur of the moment. Once I test my pens, I love these gel pens. I have them in metallic and neon and regular colors, and I use them regularly. I love the way they write, but ultimately I went back to my UniBall Signo metallic pens. These have become like some of my favorite pens to just use for just about anything. I love how clearly they write. There's not that sort of pickup that sometimes happens, those gaps in writing that sometimes happens with gel pens. These pens write smoothly and beautifully, and I highly recommend. I decided to tie the dots that I used in the cover page on the stamp into the card that I used as my sort of nameplate. I went ahead and added "This journal is loved by," the same way that Maisie Lane has in the beginning of their journals, and signed my name. I didn't, however, go in and add the Maisie Lane logo, though originally that was part of my plan. Once I started drawing those dots in, I just sort of felt like that was the way to go. So you'll notice that you see some pages that are completed that I haven't done yet, but part of the reason for that is that I go in sections typically, and how I sort of present the video is determined by what I'm doing in the video. This is more about the process of transferring the journal than it is about the artistic process of creating the spreads. So I'm showing you things that are happening in the order that makes sense in terms of putting together the transfer rather than the creative process of putting the transfer together. So technically I went through and did all the stamping before coming back to make the cards, but I wanted to show you sort of completed pages as we go along. You got a sort of sneak peek of what's happening down the line. I decided to use these markers I ordered from Amazon. They are the outliners. They're a metallic pen with usually like a silver writing with different outlines. So I decided to purchase some of those, and they came in yesterday actually, and I decided to use them in my bullet journal setup because the colors were so pretty, and really a lot of them fit very nicely into the aesthetic. I didn't talk about the aesthetic a lot, but I wanted to have something different from the beginning of the year, but because I wanted the journals to be bookends, I wanted them to be similar. So the mermaid theme from the beginning of the year, I'm sort of carrying over into the second half of the year, though not directly. You'll see the sort of fan-shaped is reminiscent of the scales on a mermaid. You'll also see that the fans have very sort of what I would call ethnic prints on them. So I really wanted to bring in this idea of the African textiles again, even though I think these stamps in some ways could be considered Art Deco. I think depending on the colors you use would determine how you would read them. Given that I am using very sort of traditional mermaid colors, I think that it sort of suits the aesthetic perfectly. So this is my future log. If you are new to bullet journaling, this is where you write out all the things that are happening in the coming months, things that aren't yet ready for a spread because you haven't made them yet. You need a place to put those things as they come up, and that's what the future log is for. I find that I have sort of very limited number of those things, but this is a great place to park it, if you will. And I knew that I needed a full year instead of just 6 months of the present year. So I went ahead and put the last 6 months for 2021 and the first 6 months of 2022. The next pages are my goals pages. I do two-page spreads for my goals. In the past, I have broken them down into personal and business goals and into short-term and long-term goals. And in the process that I'm doing now, I'm trying to find a way to mix those two processes together so that I can do what I need to do. I don't want to spend a great deal of time on them. These spreads I pull together rather quickly, and they're not very specific at this point because I really am still working through this process, and I think that's healthy. The goals pages, I think, are some of the most important pages in your bullet journal, and I recommend that you take the time to really delve in and do what's necessary so that you can accomplish what you need to. So the next two pages are my sort of idea spread, my bullet journal ideas and my song ideas. These were spreads that I really loved in my previous bullet journal, but there are a lot of ideas and things from those spreads that haven't been done. I thought I don't want to always transfer these items to new spreads every time I do them, especially within a year. So what I decided to do this time was to create spreads, but create pockets so that I could put cards in that I could transfer from bullet to bullet journal. And I think this is a very feasible and economical way to do it. I'm using the same gold paper that I used to create the background for my key. I simply measured the journal and left a 1/2 inch on the bottom and the sides, folded it, and added score tape to create my pockets. The score tape is great because it allows me a little bit of control without the wetness, and I just tape these to my journal. Voila! As you can see, I used extra pages from the back of my 2021 journal to create the cards that go in the pocket. And I simply wrote in cursive journal ideas and song ideas. The next spread is the year in pictures. I loved this spread in my 2021 2021 first half, but realized that I was missing a place to write what was happening. I kept looking at the pages and putting the pictures in and wanting to write something. So I decided to create a book within a book. You have probably seen this a lot in a lot of different bullet journals, and you've seen me do it just last month. So I created pages where I could glue the pictures, put the months, and also write things down. I think this is going to be a beautiful way to look back and really know what is going on. It's a place where I can just sort of reflect on everything that happened in the month and the reason I chose that particular photograph. So I originally planned to use this page as a quote page, but as I was stamping the page down, I just decided to not, and just to let the page breathe. This might be a space that I need later on, and that's okay. Or maybe a quote will come to me that I feel like I really need for the month, the year, and I can put that there. So next you're going to see me use a stencil. I struggle with calligraphy, and so I purchased some stencils on Amazon, and from time to time I will use them. Most often I'll just look at the font and draw it out myself, but in this case I thought I was going to go ahead and use the stencil to draw in and fill in the letters. Now I use these border markers that I picked up from Amazon. They arrived yesterday, so I didn't do a tester. And what I figured out in the process of using these markers was that there was a lot of bleed through to the other side. I did not do a pen test like I would normally, so I went ahead and created my own background paper using the Archer and Olive notebook that came in the current box and the stencil that came in the travel box, not the stencil, the stamp that came in the travel box, and the ink that came in the travel box as well. I created those papers for backgrounds, I cut them up, and I'm going to use them as placeholders rather than having to look at that horrible bleeding through for the next 6 months. I just couldn't take it. Sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. I created the paper, I cut it up, and I simply use the score tape to put it in place, and eventually pictures will go on top of that. So there you go. So next we're going to talk about the grid spacing guide. If you don't know, this is a guide that a lot of aesthetic bullet journalers use to set up their spreads. You do all the work now in setting up the grid spacing guide, and it makes figuring out how to get the spreads you want in the future done very quickly because you've already done the work. You know the number of pages, dots in your journal, vertically and horizontally, and you can break down your spreads very easily and translate that to the spreads that you create monthly, weekly, etc. So the materials used, I used these outline pens I found from Amazon. They do bleed, however. I found these great stamps from In Studio. I bought a whole set, you can see them here. I only used 2 for this setup, so I'll probably find ways to use the other ones sooner or later. I used a lot of things from the Archer and Olive boxes, both past and present. I love the subscription box. I used Memento Dewdrop ink stamps. I bought a lot of them for the purpose of this particular spread. And there's that washi tape cutter. Love that. I have 2 of them actually in various sizes, and I highly recommend them. All right, time for my absolute favorite part, the final flip. I love flipping through and looking at the final product, all the hard work coming together. I think that I did exactly what I wanted to do in marrying what I did at the beginning of the year, but doing it in a much different way. I also think that I was able to do the things I needed in terms of the actual organization of my life in a way that will suit me better for the rest of the year. Looking at those unfinished goals and sort of seeing where I am and thinking of a better way to make sure I'm accomplishing all the things I need to, including maybe looking at those goals in a different way, and also trying to find ways to make things more efficient for the future, like these cards that I can just carry with me. I think I'm most pleased with these photo pages where photos will go later on. I think they look great, and even though the paper was to cover up a mistake, I think that it all came together well. Overall, I'm pleased, and if you like this content, please give me a thumbs up, like, subscribe, all the things. Till next time.